Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Poe discussion with Jeannie and Carmen. And tonight we have a special guest with us. We have Mr. Steve Boilard, and he is going to give us a lament about a special person that's close to our heart. He's going to talk about his book called Poe's Last Lament, like Carmen is holding up there, and it's weaving in and out. The tombstones are taking it. But we are happy to have Steve join us. He has been a guest with us and a participant with us in Poe Unplugged that we've enjoyed having him. So I'm going to turn it over quickly to Steve so he can start us with an introduction about himself, and we will go from there. Hi, Steve.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks very much.
Welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I'll keep it brief. There's not a whole lot to say, other than I'm a man who doesn't have a lot of skills, but one of them is writing, I think. I've always been pretty good with words. My career, I was a college professor. I did a lot of writing of, journal articles, and I would give lectures and interviews and wrote textbooks and things like that. So I've worked with words a lot, but it's really been in my retirement years. I've been retired for 10 years now.
Okay.
That I got really interested in just writing more for fun rather than for work.
Mm-hmm.
And I've written a number of short stories, and I wrote a memoir, believe it or not, and I'm working on my first novel. The thing for me is I feel very connected to the Poe genre. And one of those comes from how I've met you is through Poe Fest, which is a gathering of I think very like-minded people.
Mm-hmm.
I discovered Poe back when I was in college. I was a very awkward, callow youth, and this is before the day when I'm a very awkward, callow adult, where I really found in Poe. I wouldn't. There's something about his writing that I just found so electric. It really resonated with me.
Mm-hmm.
I was at college. I was at University of California at Santa Barbara.
Nice.
And this is a place where they're all surfers or whatever, tanned, and here's me as this kind of dorky guy, and I was in a used bookstore and I found this compendium, which I still have right here. It's the complete tales and poems of Poe, and I read it cover to cover, and I said, "This is amazing."
Yeah.
Because the only exposure to Poe prior to that had been like a film strip in fourth grade of The Telltale Heart.
Oh, wow.
And so I didn't know anything about Poe other than he wrote this Telltale Heart kind of scary tale.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just such a discovery to me there in my 20s that, oh my gosh, Poe, I mean, he's a much more varied guy. He writes detective novels. He writes the humorous voice he uses in things like, Blackwood article and some of these other things. It floored me. It's like I felt like I was the only guy who had learned that Poe had this other side to him.
Mm-hmm.
So I was so enamored with his writing and just how precise he was in his writing, how transformative it was, his vocabulary. And so that kind of became something kind of aspirational for me. Because again, here's this guy who thinks he's really great with words, me. And I'm seeing someone who really is great with his words, Poe. And so from that point forward, I'd say it was something that I won't even pretend that it's something that I've aspired towards, but it's something that I've, in the back of my mind, I've always wanted to kind of replicate a little bit.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just to summarize. I guess I'd say I've had a career working with words. Poe was very influential in my very early years, and as I've gotten older, I've gotten more and more interested in really digging into his writing. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, I told you, like, there's a summer in 1980 or something where I read that whole collection cover to cover. And I walked around for decades after that feeling, yeah, I've read Poe. Like I've read everything he's got to write.
Mm-hmm.
And the two things I've learned later are, number one, that wasn't everything he had to write. He wrote a lot of stuff other than tales and poems.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing I learned is reading it once is not enough. And there's just so many other levels going in this. So I've, in the last 10, 15 years, I've been rereading it and discovering a whole nother side of Poe that I've just found to be so entrancing.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. I think you need to reread Poe. And, we've talked about this multiple times with many people that at different stages of your life, things you're going through,
Yeah.
you go to
Yeah.
Poe and you're going to get a different interpretation, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in some ways, it's like reading the Bible. It's a weird connection, but it's like depending on where you are in life and where your mind's at, you're going to glean new things from those words.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, what did you teach when you were a college professor?
Well, that's an embarrassing question in itself. When I went to work on my PhD, this was in the 1980s. And this is, the Cold War and Ronald Reagan talking about the evil empire of the Soviet Union and nuclear arms control and all this kind of stuff. And I said, the most important thing in the world these days is the balance of power between, the East and the West and nuclear mutually assured destruction, all those kinds of things. So I said, I'm going to become a professor of Soviet foreign policy.
Oh, wow.
And I went, back to grad school. I dutifully did all the coursework. I wrote my doctoral dissertation about Soviet-German relations.
Mm-hmm.
And almost literally, and this isn't even an exaggeration, literally the day I got my diploma was the day the Soviet Union ceased to exist.
Wow.
Mikhail Gorbachev, the fall of the Berlin Wall, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so this whole idea of a bipolar world and the Soviet Union and the evil empire just disappeared overnight. So I kind of reinvented myself because it was an obsolete field when I got my diploma.
Mm-hmm.
And I focused much more. So my belief had always been working on education of any level.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much about learning a bunch of facts and figures, but it's learning how to think. It's learning how to be. It's learning how to be a good consumer of information. It's being a way to articulate your thoughts. So I felt the idea of pivoting wasn't ridiculous, and I pivoted much more towards California politics in California. I ended up working for the California legislature for 15 years. But my interest really moved from Soviet Union much more to California.
Mm-hmm.
And in retirement, my focus has been on learning the history of the small towns of California. And so I take a lot of travels around California, and I keep a blog that this goes back to the writing part of writing about the history of these little ghost towns. And I talk to the people, around there, and I do my research, and then that night I go to a pub and I write out a little blog entry. And I find it's just the two things to say is it's a discipline for writing, it's forcing mechanism. But the other thing is the idea of your innocent question at the beginning of this is, what did I teach? And I said Soviet foreign policy. I find that all that stuff about learning how, what motivates people and how do governments work all applies just as much to learning about the history of towns in California.
Okay.
No. Well, I mean, it is a global rules of order type of thing.
Yeah.
So in the big picture can make the smallest little snapshot make sense.
Yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And what you're really, a different way of looking at that very same theme, I think, is everything eventually can be broken down to just a very individual human level. And anything we say about, I mean, just pick international relations. There's really no such thing as a country. It's just a collection of individuals acting together. So it all kind of comes back down that way. And so the human condition, I think that's the interesting part about all this, is how do people interact with one another? How do they respond to outside environment? And that, again, comes back to Poe, which I think, as you were just saying earlier, Carmen, that you are able to learn things, depending where you are in life, you learn things about these stories on how other people have reacted or how other people have interacted.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not only that, but as we age, the things that we experience in our life changes to how we interpret about what Poe is talking about. I mean, we feel it from a different standpoint. And when you're talking about your blog, correct? It's a blog, not a vlog. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. When you're talking about your blog, all I could picture was, I wonder what Poe would have done if he had that opportunity. Like he got to travel, which is kind of leading me into your book a little bit, because one of the things that Carmen and I were discussing before you got on is I told her, I said, as I was reading this, I literally had to go and check the copyright page to make sure that this was fiction, because I was so invested in the story that I could actually see the reality of this happening. And I, of course, I'm going, well, that's like par for the course for poor Poe as I was reading it. But I was like, this could be a real possibility. And I would like to get more info of, did you come up with this idea while you were doing your little traveling to these small towns, or how did this just expand to this novel, or this, would we
it's just a short, it's really a short
story. Yeah. Okay. I didn't know.
I guess what I would say, Jeannie, is, I mean, the kernel here. Well, let me back up a little bit. You had mentioned this other story I wrote, short story I wrote, called "A Dying Wish," and that's one that actually I had submitted last year to the PoeFest Saturday Visitor Awards. It was accepted as a nominee, and I found. But it did not win the award, which I'm not bitter about at all. I'm actually not. I thought the people that won were fabulous and well deserved it.
There was a lot of competition.
There was a lot, and it was. Yes. But again, these are really remarkable writers. But it kind of made me feel like, okay, I want to try this again. And so I came back from Baltimore thinking, what could my next Poe story be? And I was talking with a friend. His name's Peter. And Peter said, what if Poe had lived beyond 1849? And that's kind of the kernel he gave me. Okay. Now, I'm living in a place called Placerville, California. It's 45 minutes east of Sacramento here in California, heading up into it's the old gold country from the gold rush. Right. And I started thinking, what if Poe had come out here? Because Poe died in 1849, as we know, or as is presumed.
Yes.
And 1849 being, the gold rush. That's when the gold rush, California gold rush had begun. And what if, it just seems like that matchup. Like if Poe had to leave Baltimore in 1849, what would have been for? Gold rush is a pretty big thing in those days. And the other kind of element that kind of made me feel like pieces falling together is the place where I'm living, Placerville, used to be called Hangtown. At the time of Poe's presumed death in 1849, Placerville was called Hangtown, which seems like a perfect place for Poe, to end up.
Yes.
And I guess the last thing that kind of gave me this idea was, as we all know, and I know you've talked about before, Poe's death is surrounded by mystery. It's kind of unclear really what had happened. There's a lot of varying theories. I figured there's so much mystery surrounding his death. It's plausible that something a little more sketchy had happened. And that's where I came up with this idea that what if Poe had faked his own death. And the way I conceived the story, he'd been kind of prompted to do so by Rufus Griswold. And he ends up out in California, and it's I guess what I don't want to give the whole story away, but I think what it allowed me to do by having Poe move on past Baltimore and past his presumed death is it allowed him to kind of reflect a little bit more on his life. It gives him a chance to look at the obituaries that are being written about him. It gives him a chance to reflect on how did he end up where he ended up. And I really wanted, I couldn't make this a happy tale with, live happily ever after. It just seems like Poe couldn't. But I did think that there could be some redemption for him, where he kind of has some understanding about life and about
54 degrees.
So in essence, and this is what, we don't want to give too much about the story away, because I feel that, I will admit to you now that as I was reading parts of it, I got a little, I was like, wait a minute, if he faked his death, why didn't he go to Rhode Island and hook up with
Sarah Helen Whitman.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I got the Whitman part, but I couldn't think of the rest of it. I'm like, why didn't he go grab her and take off with her? But then that's why I was like, no, if he was, like you said, he was sick, he was in the hospital, we at least can agree that he got that far in reality, I guess, because there's some kind of more allusions to that, I guess.
Well, and there are some allusions to the women in his life, particularly, after the death of his wife. But I guess one of the things that I wanted to explore is how he treated people. If reading his biography, the way I read his biography, I keep like yelling back at him. It's like, no, don't do it. It's like you can just see these horrible decisions he makes with regard to his stepfather and with regard to bosses and with regard to, everybody, women. And so I think it's certainly plausible that there was enough complication in his relation with Whitman or others where he's just trying to make a kind of clean break from it. But in the story, I did have him meet another woman, and I had him make some horrible decisions with regard to her as well. It just feels like it's a sequence of bad decision making on his part for this brilliant guy who's got such promise, and it just seems to be the through line of his life, in my opinion.
Yeah,
and it was very appropriate and that's the thing, that's why I felt that I was living it as he was, and it felt so real to me. Is because I could see it happening and something that Poe would experience if that had happened. So kudos, thank you for giving me that option of going, it would be something I could see, and it would definitely be all Poe.
Yeah.
Because it was like the comedy of errors takes a dark turn.
Yeah. No, that's a good reference.
Yes, borrowing the title of the Roger Corman film comedy.
That's exactly what I was thinking of too.
Yeah,
exactly.
But I was going to add in that it seems like too that it's like, was it like a social awkwardness that Poe had creating or making these bad decisions? You wonder what was it that made him continue doing the same thing and getting the same results, which was not really what he wanted every time.
Yeah, no, it's I think that's one of the big mysteries, because again, this man was so gifted.
Yes.
And his mother-in-law and his wife adored him. He just had so much going for him, and it just felt like he kind of, and to be fair to him, he did have bad luck as well. But the alcohol has to have been one of the major parts of his downfall. You have to believe that that the alcohol caused a lot of his foolish decisions.
Well,
Yeah, and oh, go ahead, Carmen.
I was going to say, and just from a lot of the things I've read, he had a sensitivity with alcohol. So even just a little bit, if he would drink anything, would react in him and give him a different or a variation of looking at somebody who has drank a whole lot. It would
Yeah.
be almost comparable. Yeah, but Jeannie, what were you gonna say?
Well, I was going to say with the rampant diseases of that time and the things that where he was traveling from, who he was in coming contact with, things could have been a part of the melody, that he may have been experiencing. He could have had some type, I don't want to say an STD because, we don't know enough about his sexual life. We know he loved women, but we don't know anything else other than that because he was very specific about the females that he was involved with. Or he could have, gotten some kind of other type of disease that may have affected his brain that caused him to make some bad decisions. There's so much about that time period and the experiences of those, and we just have to acknowledge that health in that day was very poor. So,
Yeah, that's true. I guess what strikes me, while you're right, not just the alcohol, but there were other diseases that were rampant at the time. I mean,
Mhm.
certainly, its lifespans are much shorter, et cetera.
Yeah.
Somehow, though, right up to the end, he was such a brilliant writer. I mean, his
Yes.
mind seemed so sharp and being able to conceive of stories, and his writing. I mean, his vocabulary and his ability to create a tale just seemed exquisite.
Yeah.
So there's something very strong and powerful about his mind at the same time.
Hmm.
I mean, he was very focused in that area and he was very talented. And I think it was just a mix of, it's kind of like when you get caught in quicksand. You try to get out, but you can't, and you just things just keep rolling and rolling and make it worse. And I think that was Poe. He just could not dig himself out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it felt his life to me feels like, I don't know my literary terms well enough. I don't know if it's a Greek tragedy, but the idea of
Mhm.
he was destined
Mm-hmm.
for the very negative side of life. No matter how hard he tried, it was like you say, it's a quicksand metaphor. He just like couldn't get out, and it
Yeah.
just felt like the his fate was written down and he couldn't escape it,
Yes.
which is it's very sad because we've all read his various biographies about him, and I can't help but halfway through just kind of hoping against hope that can't he turn this around, the
Yeah.
poor guy.
Go
Oh,
the other
no.
road.
Yeah,
Like Robert
exactly.
Frost. Take the road less traveled. Come
Yes.
on, dude.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing that's coming to mind, and it's probably because, and I'm wondering if and there's got to be a term for this, of kind of being fated and destined to make all these kinds of bad decisions, and end up with not the I don't want to say positive, the happy ending, let's say. And I'm teaching Romeo and Juliet right now. And so a lot of the, background information, we talk about star-crossed love. And because so many people misunderstand that and think it's, yes, they're soulmates, but they're not going to have a happy ending. They're destined to be together to have a tragedy. And so I'm wondering if there is a term for kind of self-sabotage in that way, like you're not star-crossed love, but star-crossed self. I'm just wondering if there is a term for that.
Well,
Yeah,
the term during the time period, the 1840s, back when the expansion into the West Coast, manifest destiny, basically was that it was a will of God that they should move out west.
Hmm.
So, I mean, there's that terminology, but at the same
Yeah.
time, fated for tragedy is, I don't know if there is a true term for that.
Yeah.
I don't
it,
remember it.
it feels to me, again, I'm certainly no expert on this, but it feels, based on what you both say, I think of like Poe just being his own worst enemy. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hmm.
and again, whether that's fated or not, it just feels like he's the one that was throwing up a number of the obstacles by drinking when he shouldn't be drinking, um, quitting a job when he shouldn't be quitting a job. It just felt like some of, pushing too hard against his stepfather. It just feels like so many of these things he could have nuanced for such a smart guy who seems to be able to think in three-dimensional chess as he puts together like the mysteries. Surely he could be a little more strategic in his relations with other people.
That's true.
Yeah, he made some stupid decisions.
Yeah.
And you're like, what in the world were you thinking? It's like being a teacher of younger kids. I know, Steve, you taught mostly the college level, and they probably had the same instincts in some levels too.
Yeah,
But
just not quite
teaching,
as sophisticated as the young kids that you taught.
exactly, yeah, young kids I taught, some days I would just look at them and go, why? You know, why would you? It's like, really? Okay. Because you just want to take them and shake them and say, "Don't do that." Why did
Yeah.
you make that decision?
Which we
That
would
was
say to
bad.
Poe.
Yeah, it's like, what were you thinking?
Yes. Well,
But a lot of that goes back to where we all have to make our own decisions in life, and
yeah.
unfortunately, Poe was very bad at it.
Hmm.
Well, but that's another good point, Jeannie, that we talked earlier about drawing lessons from reading Poe, and I
Hmm.
think that you can also draw lessons from, for those of us who want to get a little deeper into it, you draw lessons from his life. And
Mhm.
um, again, I just see somebody who had such talent and such promise and such skill, and you just want to imagine how that all that could have been directed much more successfully.
Yeah.
Not, I don't mean even more positively, because I think he did tremendous things with what was given to him.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's just that in the end, he only lived 40 years, and at the time he died, he was penniless, and he didn't have the kind of recognition that he should have. Now, part of that due to Griswold, presumably.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's not for
Yeah.
another 50 years that we come around to see him for the genius that he is.
Yeah. And still dispelling the myth, that
Yeah.
Griswold created.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's when you want to time travel so you can go back and correct some wrongs that you're going,
Yes.
why? But it falls right into the whole premise of the winner writes the narrative. You
Yeah.
know,
That's true.
it's
I would like to go back in time travel to see Griswold and in the Seinfeld way instead of Newman, Griswold. It just sickens me. But anyway, so well, going back to writing, Steve, do you have a writing process of like how you develop your ideas and then put your words to print?
Yeah. So I guess what I'd say is two big things about the way I write. One is I find that uh, consistency of just putting in an hour or two a day,
Hmm.
and some days that's really time well spent, other days less so,
Hmm.
but just every single day. So and the other thing I've kind of learned to do is I make it one of the first things I do in the morning. It's
Okay.
like with my coffee, I'm writing. Because if you say, well, yeah, sometime in the afternoon I'll take care of it, and other things intervene. So every single day I try and put in a couple hours. The other thing I'll say about my writing process is, and I don't recommend this at all, is I will become fixated on word choice. So I'm working on a sentence,
Mm-hmm.
and I know there's a word I need, and I'll just be stopped there for the next 10, 15 minutes, trying to find the right word.
Mm-hmm.
And 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 the only way for me to push past, either I find the right word, which is, less than half the time, or I just have to write in a placeholder word. I write it in all caps so I know that it has to be changed, and
Yeah.
then try and move myself on. So
Mhm.
I don't view that as like a positive part of my process, but that's a realistic part of my process.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to do it, typing it in all caps. So you know when you're revising and editing.
I'm
Yeah.
just saying this is the wrong word, but I had to put something in here to
Yes.
continue my sentence. Um, but I find writing to be um, it's very therapeutic, and again, I think a lot of people probably feel this way. You may as well, that you have thoughts in your mind, and there's something about when they're in your mind that you don't see the leaps in logic. You don't see, it just feels like a contained thought. But as soon as you try and spell it out, you realize, oh, I haven't thought that part through,
Right.
or
Right.
this part doesn't connect to that part very well. So getting it down in writing, I find, is a good way to process your thinking and deal with things that you've been kind of noodling. So
Mhm.
I look forward to that every morning, just being able to do some writing.
That's awesome. And I could see you got kind of more of a clear head and to be able to have your thoughts come in.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead,
I was
Jamie.
just gonna say, it takes discipline also to
Yeah.
know that you do that on a regular as a routine, and that kind of thing is very hard, especially for people of artistic natures,
Hmm.
because sometimes we get so bogged down that we get writer's block, and
Wow.
then we just put it aside and don't pick it up again, and it just kind of it goes off the edge.
Yeah, I mean, it's a two-edged sword, because the more you do a habit, no matter what it is, and again, everybody's got habits they develop, the
Oh,
more you do it, I think the easier it becomes, but also the more inflexible you become. So if
yeah.
something happens where I'm not able to do my writing in the morning, I feel like my whole day's thrown off. Um, so that's kind of the two-edged sword about it. The other thing is, you talk about discipline. Um, I think artists, and I don't pretend that I'm one, I think that you need, I'm very heavy handed about the way I do this. That's just the only way I get stuff done is by just building it into my calendar. But
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think that a person that's more artistic, and a person that's more, you know, open to the muse, is able to do their writing when the mood strikes them. And they probably are much more productive than me saying, well, it's time to get my writing done, even though I don't really feel like doing it.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, therein lies where there's uh, a cohesion, in my opinion, between the creativity and just the routine. Because a lot of times it's very hard to create something if you don't put some kind of time limit or some type of, I don't really want to say a cap on it, because to me, when I think about discipline when it comes to the arts, I think about rhythm. A
Okay.
discipline to me is like a rhythm,
Hmm.
because with your routine of doing it every morning, you've actually developed your own rhythm
Yeah.
in your own process.
Hmm.
So that's what I also attribute to discipline, because it can be with anybody. It's like, even if it's not early in the morning, maybe it's, I used to love to take a ride out to the state park near the lake. And I would just sit there and just watch everything around me. And then all of a sudden, it's like there was just this overwhelming feeling that I needed to put things onto paper,
Yeah.
or I needed to grab my camera and start taking pictures. Didn't matter what I was taking of. I wasn't one of those people that just stood in one spot and just kept, picturing. It's just I had to take a picture of something.
Yeah.
And so every person with a creative side has to have their own rhythm to create their own discipline
Mhm.
for whatever their art is. I
So
guess
Gene,
is
When
so
you'd go out to the lake, would you do that with the intention of this is going to help me to write something or take pictures of something?
yes. It would be the equivalent of my muse. It would be my way of saying, okay, this is how I'm going to relieve everything that's in me that's trying to block out the creativity, because I
Yeah,
needed just to let go and look at the world around me.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things. It was like a cleansing ritual.
Yeah.
Then it allowed me to open up to the creative arts.
Mhm.
yeah,
So it was always a wondrous thing because I had such a connection. I have such a connection. I don't get to go do it as much anymore, rather anymore. But to water and the mountains and the trees, because that's where I grew up. That's me. So I think that has something to do with it.
yeah.
And the one thing that I will say that I love the most about your book, Steve, is it allows me to live Edgar's life, but not what we know of him, but what he could have been
Yes.
and what it could have been. And that makes me see him and feel so much more connected to him, thinking, it's even more tragic in my opinion,
Yeah.
because you open up what he could have done.
Well,
And I'm like,
I appreciate your saying that because that was one of the things I was trying to do. Because Poe, didn't write an autobiography, he didn't write a memoir. So the only thing we know really of him is through his writing, which was um, there are a lot of autobiographical elements, but it wasn't written as an autobiography. And so what I tried to do is humanize him. That
Yeah.
here's this guy who has these feelings and insecurities and anxieties um and I think to me he's a very sympathetic character. Again, I feel for this guy
Mhm.
because
yeah,
he brought so much and he offered so much, and in the end, he was not given the recognition and the respect that I think he deserved.
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
And it left us with wanting more, and
Yeah.
he
Oh,
wasn't there
yeah.
to give it.
Yeah. What
It's
if
like,
he had been able to live 40 more years, what would we have gotten?
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
the
Yeah.
always thing that I kind of resign myself to, is like we don't have what could have been. And a lot of times it's like, oh, don't be a dreamer, don't be an idealist, but uh, you have to. It's
yeah.
just eh, it's
If
just
he didn't, then we wouldn't have what we have today in most of the
exactly. Oh, I
anything.
know. I know. And and one thing, I was trying to find the part in the story, but I loved his friendship with Ling. And
Mhm.
it just and again, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but he felt such, I don't want to say regret, but I guess regret would be a good word, of when they went to celebrate Poe's birthday.
Yeah.
But then what happened, and then what happened afterward. And again, like you said, he is so sympathetic, and it really tore him up with the
Well,
things
and I
that
wanted
happened.
in that part of the story, bringing that character in, I wanted to give him a close friend,
Yeah.
and and because it just feels now again, I think his mother-in-law, his wife, very, very close, but it
Absolutely.
just felt like he just didn't have the other friendships. And here's somebody, and Ling is an outsider in,
Mhm.
as a foreigner
Yeah.
in the gold rush era in California, and yet he and Poe developed this bond and this
Yeah.
respectful bond, and it just felt like that Poe really deserves that. He needs somebody who's kind of got his back.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
it really it was very heartfelt, and I loved that their friendship and reading about that. That was one
good,
of my
thank
I
you.
favorite
think it's
parts.
perfect because if you think about it, Poe was so enraptured about things that happened in other countries and other people. And so him getting a friendship with someone from another country,
Hmm.
and it's like it was meant to be.
Apropos.
Exactly.
Yeah,
We use that word a lot.
I'll bet you
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we
We
just
overuse that word quite a
yeah,
lot. Uh,
we probably do.
yeah, we go pun crazy.
Yeah.
I feel pun drunk sometimes. But
Oh
anyway.
yeah, and don't get her started because her like we both are alliteration fans, but when she finds P words to go with Poe, she has like this sentence of every single word has a word that starts with P, and it's almost
Yeah.
like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. And
Yeah.
stop it, Jeannie.
I mean,
Yeah.
that may be, but I still think the 6 Degrees of Poe is brilliant.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Seriously. I
Thank
mean,
you.
that's not alliteration. That's I don't know what you call that part, but
Yeah.
that was brilliant because it does
Thank
feel like everything connects to Poe.
it
If you get 6 degrees
Mhm.
away,
It
he's
does,
so
and
influential.
it's like the influences that we can take somebody that was a contemporary of Poe, and then somebody that was a contemporary of that person, and just keep connecting it all the way down or all the way
Mhm.
through time into the present. And it's like when we decided to do this podcast, we were like, there is an infinite amount of topics we can cover. It's never
Mhm.
going to end because people are still creating things that are adapted, and it's energizing. It really is.
And it crosses over into everything. And I was reading a romance novel. Might as well just admit to it, own up to it. I will.
Oh
I
God.
was I was reading a romance novel and I was just stopped right in my tracks because all of a sudden there is this author using and putting Edgar Allan Poe in this story. And it had nothing, I mean, it's a modern day story. It had a little fantastical to it, but there was mention of Edgar Allan Poe, and I'm going, well, there's something you don't expect every day. It's
In a
like,
romance novel.
yeah, in a romance novel, and there's Edgar
Yeah.
Allan Poe.
That's great.
I mean, my story works the opposite direction. I was one of my favorite stories of Poe is "Thou Art the Man," and in "Thou Art the Man," he's talking about a case of wine that's delivered, and it's Chateau Margaux, and that is my wife's favorite wine, and she named her horse Margot after Chateau Margaux.
Aw.
Oh,
But I was just
no.
thinking, my God, there's still so here's this wine that Poe's writing about in like the 1830s or
Yeah.
1840s,
Mhm.
and is still available today. So it
Yeah.
just it just feels is to me it's another part of the 6 degrees of Poe. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
everything connects back to him somehow.
Yes. Yes. And
It's
we
like the spiral of time that just keeps going around
Yeah.
instead of it being, what is that, string? Instead of it being a string, it's a spiral.
oh yeah, spiral theory instead of string theory.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think we've said this before too, is
Mhm.
that, the 6 degrees really kind of morphed out of, the 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
And Kevin Bacon was in the following, which had the
Mhm.
serial killer that was obsessed with Poe. He was an English professor. And so I've always said that Poe and the 6 degrees and Kevin Bacon, that's where everything comes together. And
Yes.
if we can get Kevin Bacon to come on the podcast with us.
It would
Shout
be
out to
perfect.
Kevin Bacon. Yes,
Yes, exactly.
that's our goal, because then
Yes.
it will all come together.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm
So
looking
do
forward to
you,
that day.
I hope so. I hope so. Hopefully someone out there listening knows him with six
yeah,
degrees.
yeah, and we can have another 6 degrees to him and that can connect back to us. So that'd be
Yes.
good. So
Yes.
Steve, what else are you working on right now? You said you were
Uh,
working on your novel, right?
yes, I am. So I'm working on my first novel, and that I've got it. It's complete in a draft, but this goes back to my earlier conversation with you about how uh, my capital words
Mm-hmm.
and so the even though it's in draft form, there's a lot of places in there that need some work. I'm this novel I've written. I'll be fascinated to hear what other folks think of this. It too has a historical figure in it, and but brought to the present day. As I'll just say that much about it. Um,
Yay.
the other thing that I continue to do, I mentioned this blog, and to me, this is it's one of the enjoyments in life. Everyone has a hobby. Everyone has something that they really enjoy, and I found for me, it is taking little 2-3 day road trips. That's just I
Mm-hmm.
really just find I enjoy that. Getting to meet people and talk to people. I go solo. I just go by myself. I
Mhm.
got a little motorcycle I take on these things, and then at the end of each day I write my blog. Um, and so when you ask me what my writing projects are, it's like this blog is a never-ending project. There's always more trips planned, and
Mm-hmm.
and I wish I don't know if anyone else feels this way. You two seem much more accomplished than I, but I discover things and achieve things and feel like, boy, I wish that happened 50 years earlier. Boy, I wish I learned about that, some
Yeah.
time ago. But I'm really just enjoying the opportunity to take new experiences and put them into words. That's just
Mhm.
very enjoyable to me, very satisfying to me.
Yeah.
Well, that's good
It,
because that's life. So that's good.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that sounds amazing, because my husband and I like to travel, and about, let's see, 2017, his oldest daughter was finishing college. She wanted to go out west just as a trip, so we took her out there to celebrate her graduating college. And I had been to 30 something states at that point, and I'd always wanted to see all of them. And so we saw Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming, and South Dakota, and we drove probably like 1,500 miles. And so when we got back, I told my husband, I said, "Do you think it'd be crazy if we could get all 50, the rest of what I need,
Yeah.
at my 50th birthday?" And he said, "Yes, it's crazy, but I'll start planning." And he literally did. And even through COVID, during my 50th year, Alaska was number 50. We got it done.
Oh, good for you.
And my goal was, we have to go to do something in the state. It cannot just be driving through. It doesn't
Right.
count. And so that was huge. So I totally get the traveling, and I have started a book about it, but it'll probably take me 10 more years to get that done, because Jeannie and I and my husband are working on a book right now.
Oh, really?
Yes, it's a recipe book that is based on all of Poe's works. So some are,
Not
Oh my
all of
God.
Poe's works because we don't have that big of a
I
well,
was going to
sure,
say that's a
recipe.
lot of
a
recipes.
That's a lot of
sampling, a
rest.
sampling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a sampling. And I was like,
Yes.
wait a minute.
All right, so
We'll never be done with that.
they are all based on Poe's works, not
Yes.
based on all
Yeah,
Poe's
all the
works.
Yes. Yes.
recipes will
I
be
said
based
that
on
wrong. I totally
work.
said that wrong. Yes. Thank you for correcting me. But yes, yeah, we've been working on it for 2 years, and we're close to being finished and ready to start looking at that publishing process. So
So are all three of you chefs?
no,
No,
not at all.
So
no,
where'd the
we just
idea
like
come
to
from?
cook.
Okay.
We like to cook, and I mean, and one of the things that we like to do, and this started back when we were teachers, and especially we have a lot of teaching friends, and then of course the husbands just come along with it. So, and teachers, we like to do potluck. So we always bring potlucks and we bring different recipes and stuff. And so that's kind of where it was born out of, is we like to experiment and create, and we decided, hey, let's just match some of these to Poe's works.
Yes.
And it's
So,
kind of went from there.
and it's food and cocktails. So
Yes.
it's appetizers, entrees, side dishes, desserts,
Dessert.
and soups and cocktails.
Okay, so there's a race on now because your previous Gothic guest, Cheryl Joseph,
Yes.
and I at the last Poe Fest said we were going to write a Poe cocktail book.
Oh,
So it sounds like you're already ahead on this. Actually, it makes me feel a little better that maybe now we can get rid of that idea. But I think I think it would be people would be so interested in reading that. If you could, I mean, you've probably thought about all this, but if you could have like a short description making the link to the story of each of your recipes, or
absolutely.
whatever. Some photographs would be wonderful in that.
Yes.
I think people would be buying that for Christmas gifts or birthday gifts. It would be a bestseller.
I hope so.
Yeah. We're slowly putting, and the descriptions is one of the things that's been taking us the longest time.
Yes.
Is because we've been trying to write up these nice little descriptions, not only just the recipes, but how to connect them to Poe's work and how we chose them.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
But I think, you and Cheryl doing an actual cocktail book, just cocktails.
Oh, half the fun of that one. Half the fun of the cocktail book is just trying to come up with names for Poe related.
Trust me. We've had some fun with that.
Yeah, that's been a blast. And my husband, years ago, his second job, he was a bartender, and so he is very good at how to balance things. And one of the cocktails we did last summer, he entered a tiki contest of entering the cocktail, and it was, I forget, I think it was like maybe about 40 people that entered, and they picked 6, and he was one of 6. He didn't win.
Really?
Yes. And we actually got to go up, and he mixed it while I told the story. It's based on Hop Frog, and it's called The Last Jest. And it is delightful.
And what's the main alcohol in that?
Tequila.
Really?
Yes.
I can't wait to try one.
Yes. Yeah. It's a very unique cocktail, but it's wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had to start pushing him towards some gin mixing, because I'm a gin person. I'm like, come on, you got to put some more gin and vodka in here.
Well, and he's a bourbon guy, but
yeah,
we've got all kinds of cocktails with all kinds of different alcohols. So,
well, I can't wait to see that. I should tell your viewers that last October, when I checked into the Lord Baltimore Hotel, I saw this young lady and her husband sitting there, and I think you had a computer that had a Poe sticker on it, and I said,
yes,
"You happen to be here for Poe Fest," and we had a nice little conversation, and then I noticed that through the rest of Poe Fest, there you guys were everywhere. It's like you seem to be like the central figures of the whole event.
Yeah, they're like bad pennies. They just keep showing up.
Yes. But yeah, what was really cool last year was you were the first Poe person that we talked to. So that was really cool. And
oh, is that right?
yes, and that was right, doing, being a vendor at the festival. But then I was actually also going on the Victoria Price, the Poe Price trip. With that group, and it was one of the best trips I've ever had in my life or been on in my life, and I would do it 100 million times again. It was amazing.
I did not go on the trip, but hearing her speak
Hmm.
at the Black Hat Ball, or no,
Yeah.
it was the Black Hat Hall, it was the night of the
Oh, the Mask of the Red
Mask of the Red
Death.
Death.
Yes, yes.
But she is just fabulous. She is just a
She
wonderful, wonderful
is.
person.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she is. And spending time with her and hearing some of the stories about Vincent Price and
yeah,
just it was magical. It really was.
yeah,
Was.
yeah.
All right, now, Steve, is your book on Amazon? Where
Yes,
can
it
they buy
is.
it? Where
It
can
is
people
on
buy it?
Amazon. It is a short story, so it's just a few bucks. It's not an expensive book to buy. It's
Okay.
also available as a Kindle download for 99 cents. So
Okay.
you have no reason not to read this book.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was gonna say we highly recommend whoever is listening or watching needs to read this.
Yep,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes. It gets the 6 degrees of Poe stamp of approval.
That's right.
And
Yes.
that's all I was looking for. So now I can
Yeah,
die happy.
that's right. Yeah. I I had to go with the stamp behind me to go,
And
because I had to.
I noticed that as soon as we connected, and that impressed me
Yep.
because this is exactly the setting for those of you who have not yet read the
Mhm.
book. That is exactly the setting that Poe ends up in at the California Gold Rush in 1849. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
uh,
And that I think that made it even more realistic for me because that's the whole time period that I was teaching before I had to retire.
oh, you
And
were
I love teaching
okay.
that part of American history because I was teaching from the colonization all the way up through to the open range.
Uh-huh.
So Transcontinental Railroad was the last thing I taught.
Yeah. So that's just a little bit after this.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, and I have him run into several historical figures, John Studebaker being one of them.
Hmm.
There is a priest he runs into near the end who is actually an actual priest there in Hangtown. So,
Okay.
I tried to make it as true to the era as possible.
Okay.
No. Well, thank you, because I appreciate that when I read my stories, because that's the one thing that gets me sidetracked quicker when I'm reading is if somebody is so off base about what the time period and the
Yeah.
setting, and I'm going, no, okay.
Well,
The
for what
teacher
it's
in me goes,
worth,
nah,
I mean,
okay.
to your point, one of the things I felt compelled to do in writing this, a lot again, like so many of your viewers, I have at least a general understanding of Poe, but I decided to read a couple of Poe biographies
Yeah.
just to really understand the character and what he was going through and what he was like.
Mhm.
And there's a number of different, I mean, this day and age, particularly, there's a number of very, very good Poe biographies. Again, all of them, I read just yelling, please don't do it. Just seeing
Yes.
these bad decision making. But yeah, it was an opportunity for me to learn more about the actual reality of Poe's upbringing and his life and his motivations and what a great way. I think whenever we read, even if it's reading fiction, we want to come out understanding the world a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I felt in writing this, I understood Poe a little bit
Yeah. And
Nice.
that makes sense. And I felt that in reading it.
better.
That
Good.
I did too.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to point out in the stamp is that all the gentlemen have dark hair, they have mustache and beard. That they could all be
Yeah.
the four pose of gold.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if they have bags under their eyes, but yeah, it's pretty close.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it fits perfectly because all of them, they were out in the middle of nowhere, so they didn't
Oh,
have shaving
Yeah.
supplies. That's why I
oh,
had the beards and,
yeah,
carrying water on their back, and because most of that water contained the gold, because that's what
yeah,
they would do to the
absolutely.
thing. So their clothes actually look better than they should, in my
I was going to
opinion.
say
Yeah,
those are models.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, the USPS put those on there, like, go on, okay, stand there, don't move.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Steve, before we go, one question we always ask, and you did already allude to one story you said is one of your favorites, Thou Art the Man.
Yeah.
We always ask, do you have a favorite Poe story and or poem? Sometimes people have one of each. Sometimes some people just like poetry, some people just like
Yeah. I'm not as much of I have a harder time appreciating poetry. I think I don't mean that to disparage it at all. I
right,
more
right.
to disparage myself that I'm just not as good enough to understand it. Although I know you've got coming up um, To One in Paradise, which
Yes.
has really, for whatever reason, it's a very short poem,
Hmm.
but I think Poe once said the most poetic topic is the death of a beautiful woman,
Yes.
and that's what this is about. And so To One in Paradise to me is just poignant and heart wrenching, and
Yeah.
you just feel how much he loved her and how much he misses her.
Hmm.
So anyway, that probably is my favorite poem.
Okay.
In terms of the stories I mentioned earlier, I mean, I like so much of his work, and it really kind of depends on what
Mhm.
I've read most recently. But Thou Art the Man really rates up there for me, and the reason
It's a
for that
great
is
one.
because um, it's it's a mystery, and Poe, as you talked about last month about the Dupin mystery,
Mhm.
Marie Roget, he really kind of started the whole genre of
Mhm.
detective fiction. And this is a mystery where it's not really a detective, but still the narrator knows more than he lets on at the beginning.
Right.
Um, it's got just the amount of color and detail, the way that Poe always tends to write. There is this set piece in it of the corpse, popping out of the
Right.
crate, which is just it's just so. I did a search a year or two ago. There's been no cinematic adaptations of this, even though I think it's such a cinematic set piece.
Yeah.
Um, so I love that part of it, and then there's an element of humor to it.
Hmm.
So it's quintessential Poe as far as I'm concerned.
I
It's
agree.
it's a very short read, but if
Mhm.
you haven't read Thou Art the Man before, read it after this Poe cast. It'll take you 20 minutes, and it'll be time well spent.
Absolutely. I
Yes,
agree.
I
Absolutely.
agree.
Yes.
Yes. And so,
And yes, so definitely join us at the end of the month, as Steve mentioned, Poe Unplugged, and we're reading To One in Paradise. And Steve is going to be there as our guest
yes.
and talk about Alan Parsons Project's Tales of Mystery Tales of Mystery Imagination, their first album, and it is all dedicated to Poe because it's all the music is written for the stories or poems, and
Yep.
that To One in Paradise is one of those songs. And so I'm really excited about that.
Yeah,
Yes.
as am I, and appreciate your willingness to kind of explore that side because
Yeah,
the song to One in we'll talk about this next month, but the song
yeah.
to One in Paradise by Alan Parsons is different words than Poe's words,
Mhm.
except for the last stanza. But I think it really captures in modern language exactly what Poe's trying to say. So
Yes,
everybody really ought to come back and come to your podcast, your
yes, I
podcast.
agree. Yes, thank you. All
Yes. I agree. I agree. Okay.
right, Jeannie, do you have anything else?
No, just want to say thanks, Steve, for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and I
That's
enjoyed your
awesome.
book wholeheartedly.
Hmm.
And I appreciate that, and I thank you both for the project you're doing. I think there's Poe is such rich material that will be it can be mined forever, just because again each of us and each generation finds new things in it. But you two
Absolutely.
are
Mhm.
carrying the torch, and you're creating a community which I just find so wonderful to be able to communicate with one another. You're creating a space for these conversations. So thank you so much for letting me be part of it.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
Thank you.
And on that note,
well, yes, on that note,
we are
are
out.
Out.